Next slide.
We're going to go through some of the things that in the watershed we've been doing since 2009. The reason we picked 2009 is, quite honestly, 2009.
Hold that microphone if you don't.
Okay. 2009 is the point at which the microcystin and the toxins in the lake was first identified. So, given that, I'm going to give you a brief history of some of the things going on in the watershed since 2009. 2009, actually, Francis Springer went ahead right at first. One of the first things we did was look at the amount of nutrient management plans that we had in the watershed. And I've mentioned quite a few times where we're at with nutrient management plans in the watershed. At that point in time, we had somewhere around 23% of the producers had what we considered to be a current nutrient management plan, and that would have been one that had been written within the last 5 years, so from 2005 through 2009. As the rules came into place, the nutrient management plans became a requirement. Over the last 3 years, we've written or received and reviewed 156 CNMPs. Of those, we've rejected one. We've referred one of those plans to ODA for a permit to operate through ODA's Livestock Environmental Permitting Program. That said, right now, 99% of the producers in the watershed have a current nutrient management plan. Those plans cover roughly somewhere real close, a little higher, a little lower, to 90% of the cropland in the watershed. What does that mean? We have about, got to look for my number, 46,000 acres in the watershed, cropland acres in the watershed. Of those 46,000 acres of cropland, about 41,500 are covered in our plans that we have through the Grand Lake St. Mary's distressed watershed rules. That's not to say that the remaining ground doesn't have any kind of a nutrient management plan on it. We've got to keep in mind that the program I mentioned earlier, ODA's Livestock Environmental Permitting Program, there are 14 permitted operations in the watershed as well. The acres that are contained in those management plans would be over and above what we have in our distressed watershed rules. Essentially, we've divided those up. ODA's watching those 14. We're watching 155 now at this point in time. So that's where we're at with nutrient management plans. And just to give you a flavor for the nutrient management plans themselves, that nutrient management plan goes through an accounting or an inventory of the animals on the farm, goes through the manure production on the farm, goes through their cropland acres, what the crop rotation on those acres are, what the nutrient uptake of those crops will be, looks at the current soil tests for those farms, and then establishes a nutrient application plan for each one of those fields. And we're doing that down at the field level. Looking forward, we're going to be following up and checking on the implementation of those plans. So that's where we're at with the nutrient management plans. These are the numbers that I guess I got a little bit ahead of myself. Originally, on December 15th, 2012 is when the nutrient management plans were required by the rule. We had 156 operations that met that definition. Right now, we've got 154 that we're reviewing, are current, and are approving those. Why is the difference between the two? One has, we've referred them to ODA for permitting under their permitting program, and the last one is DNR is pursuing enforcement action on the last one, because that is the plan that we've rejected, or that ODNR has rejected. Good. Okay, so some of the things that are going on in the watershed. To be perfectly honest, Bill Miller asked us to put together some numbers for a display board at the regatta, and that was the first time we really took the time to look backwards behind us to see what we've been getting done over the last 3 years and to take an accounting of it. So first thing we're going to talk about is a little bit of monitoring that's in the watershed. I know that a lot of you know about the Chickasaw Creek watershed, or the water monitoring station. I think there's one in Coldwater as well now, and the installation on the Beaver has just been completed. But some of the things that are going on up in the watershed is what we call edge of field monitoring. We've got 5 stations in the county that are monitoring runoff at the edge of the field. 3 of those are inside of the watershed. And this is being done in coordination with ARS, the Agricultural Research Service, which is an arm of USDA. And what we're doing, or what they're doing, is they're looking at the surface runoff and tile runoff, and right now they're finishing up the collection of the baseline data. These structures were installed in late 2010, early 2011. And to get their research done, they needed to establish a multiple year baseline as far as what the water was coming off. Going into next year, what ARS is going to start doing is looking at the management practices on those fields and compare what happens with the phosphorus runoff in those fields. And what's really unique about this is that for each one of those fields, they have 5 sites. For each one of those, they have 2 collection sites. So they can run a control on one and run their management practices on the other to see what the effect is on a myriad of nutrients, phosphorus being one of them. So we've got 3 of those sites in the watershed. Probably the most difficult thing that we're dealing with in Grand Lake and in Ohio in general is that the idea and the thought of a dissolved reactive phosphorus problem is a fairly new concept. And I think I've mentioned it to you all before, but 5-6 years ago, if you talk to somebody in the conservation or the environmental world about controlling phosphorus, well, the standard answer was you control phosphorus by controlling sediment. And our water quality numbers coming out of Chickasaw say that sediment yield coming off of Chickasaw Creek is a little less than half of what it is in a lot of our comparison channels across the state. What we discovered very quickly is we have a dissolved reactive phosphorus problem, dissolved phosphorus in the water. And we're still learning and identifying the best practices to mitigate and control that at the field level. If we can control it at the field level, it takes all the need for alum in the lake away, if we can control it at the field level. And the thought is that by and large we can control it a lot with different practices and field management. What those practices and what those management items are still being learned. So, edge of field monitoring, we've done a lot of cover crop stuff. Cover crop field days in the watershed, we had OSU Extension educator Jim Horman here for a short period of time, and his bailiwick was cover crops. And we've got a lot of things spurred and started with cover crops. Cover crops has been a fairly new item, again, that's come along real strong in the last 5 years in the agriculture world. We're having cover crop field days. We've had a lot of cover crops installed in the watershed through federal farm bill programs, to be quite honest. Most of those federal farm bill programs and those contracts that were originally signed are starting to run out, and we're seeing the adoption of the cover crops without the farm bill programs. We've had hundreds of acres being planted in the watershed this year to harvest, since harvest in July. One of the things that I think that our programs, our farm bill programs brought in is the usefulness of that cover crop following wheat and following corn silage. And we're seeing a lot of those going in. So cover crops is we're still learning a lot about them, but it's become a pretty important item as far as the watershed management and trying to keep those nutrients from a manure application up in the field, take advantage of that nitrogen that we applied with the manure. Hopefully this is a new thing that's going to run for quite some time. In late July 30th of this year, we had a manure application field day. One of the things that we're starting to see is that the progress or the changes in the livestock industry over the last many years, and I'm going back decades now, the last 15, 20 years, a lot of our application windows have gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. I'd say it was the tightest probably in 2003, 2004, 2005. And we probably had the bulk majority of the manure being spread in a 6 to 10 week time frame. We've been changing that slowly with some of the cover crop things, but what we're trying to do is host a manure application field day and bring in different equipment and different technologies and trying to open up new manure application windows. The one that we were displaying here that day was what's called a nutrient boom, and what we're trying to demonstrate that day is applying manure to a living, growing crop through May, June, July. We had a lot of interest. We had over 100 people there that day to see how that was working. We had some guys that were taking pictures and jotting down notes. I think they had visions of trying to build their own once they got back home. But this is a field day we're going to try to repeat year in and year out moving forward, and strictly looking at manure application practices in the field to try to improve that manure management once it goes from the storage into the field. Concrete or lot covers. Roofs over lots. Why are we doing this? The drier we can keep manure, the less mobile it is. The less mobile the nutrients in that manure are. All right? So we've had a lot of, I'll be honest guys, we've had a lot of assistance coming from the federal farm bill through EQIP programs and USDA. Over the last, since 2009, we've built about 41 lot covers, and that's strictly a cover over an open lot to eliminate that wastewater coming off of there. We've got about 32 that are going to be installed or constructed between now and probably next fall or into early 2015. We're going through and we're trying to get a better accounting and a fuller grasp of these numbers, but 41 of those have been installed. The reason that I think they're important is because they eliminate the rain from hitting the manure, and they reduce the amount of liquid manure that we've got. If we can keep that manure in a drier state and a more solid state, it's more economical to export out of the watershed altogether, and it's a lot less mobile once it goes onto the field. Dry stacks, we've installed 64 dry stacks of various sizes, anywhere from, I think the smallest one we built was 32 by 40, the largest one we built, oh gosh, I'm not even going to guess at that, it's well over 70 feet wide and however many feet long. Through the dry stacks, what we're trying to do is build a better capacity to manage manure in the watershed so that it doesn't have to go out in the winter, so it doesn't have to go out when the field is wet, so it doesn't have to go out when the conditions are poor. So we've built 64 of those over the last 3 years. There are, actually we've got to adjust this number of, there's 32 that Francis and I had identified to be installed soon. As we go through our numbers and go through and do a lot better accounting of that, I think we've got a lot more of those to be built even yet this year than just 32, and talking with Steve McDevitt with NRCS. Manure storage holding ponds. Again, the holding ponds, we built 11 of them over the last 2009. 7 are to be constructed here over the next 2 to 2.5 years. And we've had 1 anaerobic treatment lagoon. The biggest thing for the holding ponds is, again, those holding ponds, for the most part, they're going to be receiving open lot water that had been going out or was uncontrolled in the past. Now, whether it was getting directly or causing a direct violation of pollution abatement laws, we couldn't confirm that on any of those, but it is now the lot water that's going to be controlled, stored, and land applied according to the rules. The anaerobic treatment lagoon, that is the same technology that Chickasaul's wastewater treatment plant, Montezuma's wastewater treatment plant, St. Henry and Coldwater's wastewater treatment plants use. The only difference in the anaerobic lagoon that we have installed is it is adapted to pigs instead of people. So, and that is a treatment lagoon. We get a lot of phosphorus settling, and that phosphorus is stored in the bottom of the lagoon, and the wastewater is pumped off the top, typically, at least on years like the last 2, onto a living crop as irrigation water. Silage leachate collection systems. I'll be quite honest, this is something that until 2010 wasn't really on our radar screen. Historically, looking backwards at ODNR's pollution abatement programs, we hadn't seen a whole lot of problems with silage leachate. The drought years of 2011 and 2012 taught us a couple lessons. Across the state, we had several discharges that were sourced back to a silage leachate problem, where we've got juice coming out of a silo, getting into a tile, and being discharged. Since then, we've been taking pretty close accounting of where we're at with silage leachate, and we've installed 8 of those systems, and we've got another 7 of those systems to be installed here in the next year and a half. Wastewater treatment wetlands, we built 2 of those in the watershed since 2009. Both the ones that we've constructed were behind milk houses. We've taken the discharge that had been going to a tile, and we've eliminated it by processing that water through a wetland. We've only adopted 2 of them. To be perfectly honest, they take up a little more room, and they're not as popular as probably the next option. The next option is irrigation systems. The same thing we're doing with the wetland is we're capturing that milk house water, bringing it into a tank, and irrigating that water onto a grass field, a pasture, or something along those lines. We also have a couple systems where we're applying that wastewater to a crop field and a grass filter area. Me personally, I like these systems a lot. If you look at the typical milk house, anywhere from 400 to 600 gallons a day is what's coming out of that milk house. We can take that water, and instead of diluting manure or making more liquid manure with that water, we can irrigate it on the grass, and those systems are designed to kick on about every 4th day, and they apply about 1/10 of an inch of rain. Very minimal amount of water that goes out with them. It goes out on grass. That wastewater is taken up by the grass and processed. I like them a whole lot. The ones that we've installed thus far, I'm thinking over the last 3 years we've pulled about somewhere in the range of 1 million gallons of wastewater that was going out, untreated wastewater going out of tile, and we're now capturing that and getting that into an irrigation system properly handled. Compost facilities, we haven't done a whole lot of building the compost facilities. We've got 5 of them to build next year, or the roofs to go over the top of them. We still have a lot of guys that are using rendering services in the watershed. By and large across the state, that rendering, the ability to render isn't there. We're lucky enough to have GA Windsor in Wapakoneta. They still have to do a lot of rendering services. And to be quite honest, we've got a lot of guys that are bringing their dead stock to the landfill and landfilling. But we have had quite a few of the composters get contracted for the next couple of years. So those are the structural measures that we've been doing over the last several years. If we look at manure management by and large, we have seen a lot more export of manure. If we go to waste transfer, what we're trying to do is get that waste into fields that it's not historically gone to outside of the watershed. I don't have the numbers on how many gallons we have, but since 2009, we've documented that of the poultry manure in the watershed, and that would include our ODA, Livestock Environmental Permitting Program permits, and the turkeys and the chickens that are underneath the distressed watershed rules, we're exporting somewhere north of 93% of that manure out of the watershed altogether. I'm confident that it's quite a bit higher than that. We've not been able to document that. And I'll be quite honest, the reason why I'm confident it's a lot higher than that is because this time of year is when you see the stockpiles of manure out in the soybean field. And as I drive the watershed, I don't see those stockpiles in the soybean fields inside the watershed. So that export's going with poultry manure. We've got a lot of liquid swine manure getting trucked around as well. We've got swine manure going from Maria Stein out towards Portland. We've got it going from just south of St. Mary's all the way out close to Buckland. So we've got a lot of liquid manure that's being trucked out of the watershed altogether. So those are all positive steps. And some of the bigger things that we've seen, I mentioned it earlier with cover crops. What we're seeing with the cover crop management is that we've got guys that are applying manure after wheat is harvested. They're applying that manure in July or August and coming back and putting a cover crop on it. Or this example that you've got in front of you is a wastewater effluent from an anaerobic lagoon being applied on top of alfalfa. That's a perfect situation. That alfalfa needs the water this time of year. They're coming back through, that alfalfa is taking up the NP and K that we're applying, the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium that we're applying on that wastewater, and that field 3 weeks later is being harvested as silage and going back for use as feed. So I think the next one we've got another example of liquid manure application being applied mid-August. A couple days later, the cover crops are planted in there, and Francis and I were out there Thursday, to go ahead and take a few pictures of that. What they got planted in there is oats. That oats are soaking up the water, soaking up the nitrogen and the nutrients that we applied on that field. I don't know what the landowner has in plan for this, if he's going to plan on harvesting it or let it go fallow, trying to hold those nutrients over for next year. But those are some of the things that we're really starting to see in the watershed as far as the practices, the structural measures, and the manure management on the land. which are all positive steps. I guess Tim also asked, I think that's my last slide. If you have any questions or concerns on any things that you see as far as wastewater or pollution problems, give us a call. My cell phone number is 395-6210. Francis is up there on the board, 234-4678. If you have concerns, give us a call. If we see something out there that's a problem, we want to address it. If we see something out there that's a concern but isn't a problem, we want to help you understand what it is. Typically when we go out anymore, it's our standard that we're going to go out there with an ammonia test kit. If it's manure that's causing the problem, we're going to pick that ammonia up in the water real quick. We can follow those up. If the ammonia doesn't shows itself to be a problem, we can also then start to do a little more extensive testing on that water. We'll find the source if we can find one. Sometimes we have to hunt after them for a while, but we'll find the source if we see a discharge. Some other things that we're trying to get going. This past Thursday, Tim was kind enough to chauffeur us around on the lake a little bit. We had 6 producers from the Watershed just to take them to show them some of the things that are going on out on the lake. We took them to see a walk around the treatment train. Took them out on the lake, saw the backside of the treatment train, saw the spoil site, the littoral wetlands, as well as got them on the dredge and let them poke around on the dredge itself a little bit. We had a lot of good conversations today, and we're just trying to open up a little more communication from the ag side to get a little more appreciation for what's all going on the lake. To that end, we're in the very early stages, but what we're trying to do is possibly pull together a farm tour for later this fall, so we get some folks on the farm to see what else all going on the farms as well. But we're at the very early stages of that. I don't know that we're going to be able to pull that off, but that's what we're working on. So with that, Francis, did I cover all the high points? Okay. If you have any questions, I'll stick around after the meeting, or I'll take a few right now, whatever you want me to do, Tim.
If anybody got any questions?
How much of the equipment money was actually used in our watershed?
How much how many EQIP dollars were used in the watershed? I can't say offhand because we're trying to go through every contract since 2009 to get a full accounting of every practice that was done, and we're not complete with that yet. But my last number, help me out, Francis, it was north of $6 million since 2009 of farm bill monies that have been spent in the watershed. Or I shouldn't say spent, that's the wrong word, obligated in the watershed, because all those contracts haven't been completed yet. And it's a small point, but it is a big thing.
Well, I've sat here about 3 years now, and this is all good stuff. I compliment everybody that's been involved in what they're doing. You know, anytime you sit here and hear arguments going on, and this has got to be the most positive thing I've heard. It's all good, and it's not quick, but it's all good.
Thank you. Thank you. I think there was another question over here.
Yeah, I have
You only use 2, Joe.
no. The last time the ship was here, one of the things I was asking about was the monitoring of the first water that's coming in. Yeah, if we can actually get that to the point where we can actually have it summarized and highlight where we can actually see that. But we get any closer to actually learning what's been coming down this watershed into our lake.
Miller and I were just talking about that, and he's given me the raw numbers. I'm making excuses here, but to get the processed or the data from Heidelberg's been kind of slow in coming. I've not had a chance to take those numbers and see if we can identify any trends. That said, I am by no means a statistician or a water quality expert through all those numbers, but it's going to be very difficult to start to build a trend line because you got Mother Nature that kicks what the base flow is and what the weather is every year. That said, when we started down this road in 2009, it was my opinion then, and it's still my opinion, that here in the next year or so we should be able to see a baseline and some trends. The reason for that is it just takes a lot of data to start to see any of those and normalize that. When Heidelberg came here, I think they were talking about a minimum of 3 water years, and a water year I think essentially is from October to October, but 3 water years to establish that baseline. And right now, with the 2012 data, we would have 3 full years for that baseline. But to say that anybody's gone back and looked at the trends yet, that's not happened. I'd look for that to happen in the next 12 months.
I'm waiting.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.